Hey everyone, David Aragona here with the January 24th edition of Horses to Watch, where we take a look back at some races from last week, trying to find some horses that had trips in the races, maybe were prevented from achieving their optimal result, and make some notes about the trips that they had to assess whether or not they could be horses we want to bet back in the future, and also just try to learn something about watching trips and finding examples of horses that you think were prevented from achieving their best result in other races where similar events occurred. Let's look back at a couple of races from last week at Aqueduct and one from Gulfstream. We'll begin with the pair from Aqueduct, starting with a race from last Thursday, January 18th, the eighth race on the card. It's a New York bred maiden special weight going 6 furlongs for the 3-year-olds. And I just want to note something before we start the replay about what we're looking for in these two Aqueduct replays. There was a significant rail bias in effect on both days that we ran races last week at Aqueduct. They canceled Saturday and Sunday, but both Thursday and Friday of last week, it really felt like the track was deep and slow, and the only horses that weren't staggering to the finish were those that spent a significant amount of their trips on the rail. So let's begin race 8 from last Thursday, and we'll roll the replay. And we're going to focus on two horses, the number 12 Palace Boss and the number 13 St. Gaudens. Obviously, already breaking from outside post positions, they're at a disadvantage. And you do want to watch how this race unfolds and the horses that actually have success. And you'll notice that primarily they're horses that spend a significant amount of time towards the inside. The number 9 Allied Attack will be the eventual winner of this race. That gray horse, Last Drink, who was a first-time starter, who you'll see looks like he's going backwards around the turn, just rides the rail and sometimes somehow finds more energy in the stretch to rally on to finish third in this race. But the two horses we're focusing on, the number 12 Palace Boss, you can sort of see him behind a wall of horses towards the back of the pack. Really nothing for Katie Davis to do except sit there in the 3 to 4 path and try to find a way through. And you can notice she's trying to make progress. The number 13 St. Gaudens coming under a ride, but even though they're being motivated to go, they're just spinning their wheels out in the center of the racetrack, while all of the horses that are making any forward progress are doing so in the 1 to 2 path, racing closest to the inside. And you could see just these gaps between the runners growing as those that are saving ground towards the inside are going forward, and everybody else that's off the rail is just going backwards through the stretch of this race. And that's the pattern that we saw on both Thursday and Friday of last week at Aqueduct. As for the two horses that I thought were compromised by their trips on this day, Palace Boss already had a race under his belt, but that came in a $500,000 stakes race. He was overmatched on debut in that spot, was supposed to take a step forward here against Maiden Company for Horacio De Paz, but I think was prevented from doing so by the wide trip that he got. He's got pedigree, being a half-brother to Castle Chaos, who was third in the Cigar Mile last month. So I think this one's got more to show, just hasn't been in the right spot yet. And as for St. Gaudens, he was a first-time starter going out for Chad Brown and Peter Brandt, but a well-bred one by Into Mischief out of the Grade 1 winning dam Artemis Agroterra. I think that he showed some ability to run on at the end of this race, but just was never towards the rail from that outside post position and was really prevented from achieving a better result. So both horses, I think, that we can look for in maiden races in the future. Let's move on to a race from Friday at Aqueduct. Pretty much the same situation in effect. You wanted to be towards the inside for the majority of your trip to have your best chance. We'll take a look at race 7 from that January 19th card. It's a New York bred optional claimer, 45,000, non-winners of 2 other than at 7 furlongs. And you'll see the number 1 Lady Mine is the horse that we want to highlight here. She has a tendency to break a bit slowly. This is nothing new for her, but I think when she breaks slowly in this situation, when the rail is the place to be, well, it's tough for the jockey to just park the horse on the rail at the back of the pack and hope the race comes back to you, especially since this didn't feel like it was going to be that kind of race. There was only one speed signed on after scratches. That was the number 2 Sue Ellen Michigan, and she's just going to ride the rail to victory, dominating this race on the front end. The number 1 Lady Mine, you could see that she had run down the backstretch after that slow break, and Trevor McCarthy dealt a bad hand, tries to make the best possible decision to advance, but he has to do so racing outside in the 3 to 4 path, and you just couldn't do that and expect to win the race on Thursday and Friday of last week. But Lady Mine actually comes pretty close, and I think you really want to upgrade this performance based on how well she runs with this outside trip. And you could just see the number 2, Sue Ellen Michigan, riding the rail. The other horse involved in the finish, that's the number 5, who was riding the rail around the far turn, briefly drifts into the 2 path, but goes back down there in the stretch to make a closing run. And really, Lady Mine, if you watched other races on Thursday and Friday, at this point, she would have had every excuse to start going backwards, as most horses did after getting these 3 wide trips. But she keeps finding more, stays on, and almost gets there at the wire, just falls about a head short as they come onto the finish line. This race came up fairly slow. Don't be fooled by the times. It's not as slow as it seems. 129 for 7 furlongs. The entire racetrack was playing very slow Thursday and Friday of last week, but it only got a 75 buyer. That's mediocre for the level, but I really think you want to upgrade the speed figure of Lady Mine when she comes back for her next start, because she ran a lot better than that bare result would indicate. And then we'll close things out with one race from Gulfstream Park in Florida. This was a race from last Sunday, January 22nd, the second race on the card. It was the first division of 2 maiden special weight races, going a mile and the 16th on the turf for the 3-year-old fillies. One was the second race. I think the other was the 10th race, and they had wildly different pace scenarios. The other one had a pretty fast, honest pace. This race that we're going to look at, we can roll the tape here, just features an excruciatingly slow pace, and I think it really works against the number 8, Sagesta, who is breaking a little bit slowly. She was a first-time starter going out for Juddmonte and Chad Brown, ridden by Irad Ortiz, so strong connections on her side, and she's going to finish far back in here. I think she only beats one runner home, but she never has a chance to get involved in this race, because after that slow break, Irad just tries to get her to settle towards the back of the pack, but the leaders just keep backing the pace down more and more and more, and as they go onto the backstretch, they are just going to really slow it down. I think the first quarter went in 24 and change, but they go to the half in upwards of 51 seconds. And I looked up the Time Formulas pace figures for this race to just get a sense of how slow it was compared to the other division. The other division of this race had pace figures that were in the 140s, 130s. This race has early Time Formulas pace figures of 62 down to 45, 49 before they really sprinted home. And they are going to sprint home at the end of this race. And I think that really makes things difficult for any horses that were trying to make closing runs from towards the back of the pack. Unsurprisingly, the horses that finished first and second in this race are the number 2 and the number 10, who are the 2 horses sharing the lead right now. The only horse that makes a significant rally is the number 4, who's just stalking in behind them, saving all the ground. The horses that tried to go wide, to rally around horses, just were spinning their wheels, not able to kick for home as quickly as the top 2, who just had so much left in the tank at this point. And you could see the number 8 Sagesta. She briefly comes into the screen towards the back of the pack. She's going to pass nobody in the stretch, but there's really no changing of position through the stretch, so let's not pay too much attention to that. I looked up the GMAX closing splits for this race to see how fast everybody was coming home relative to each other. Sagesta comes home very fast for the final 8th, and now take a look at the gallop out here. There she is, coming into the screen right there, the number 8. Within the blink of an eye, as they gallop out into the clubhouse turn, she suddenly goes from 9th place to running out past the 2 leaders, the first and second place finisher. So she had really built up a lot of momentum. And I was speaking of those GMAX closing splits. She ran her penultimate 16th in 5.51 seconds. That's fast. And her final 16th of a mile as the fastest split of anybody in the race, 5.40. That's a final furlong in 10.91. Now, take into account, she was basically walking for the entire race prior to that, but to show 10-4 closing speed at the end of a race for a first-time starter, and then not just that, she galloped out with that momentum all the way into the clubhouse turn to pass the leaders as quickly as she did. It feels like there was a lot of untapped potential in this race, and we didn't come close to seeing what this horse is capable of. She's got pedigree by Go Sapper. She's out of the Grade 1 winning Dam Antonou, who was such an impressive winner of the Just a Game a few years ago at Belmont Park. Feels like there is potential with this one to do a lot better next time out, and based on her published running line, it's not going to be so apparent that she has the ability that I think we saw in that replay. So suggest the definitely one to keep an eye on when she shows up in another spot in the future like this. Those are all the horses to watch for this week. If you want to follow any of these moving forward, you can add them to your horse watch or into your account on DRF.com. You'll get email notifications when these horses are entered back in the future. Or if you want to go in DRF Formulator or Timeform US, if you have those subscription, take advantage of the notes feature. You can make trip notes about these horses or any others that you see. I definitely recommend that with those races at Aqueduct last week. Just go through, watch some replays, and make notes of the horses that had wide trips against the bias, because those will show up when the horses are entered back in PPs in the future. And I think they're definitely going to serve you well to take advantage of that track bias. Well, everybody, thanks for tuning in to Horses to Watch this week. I'll be back with another group of horses to watch next week.